Hello, this science lesson is about blood vessels. The learning aim is to make sure that you can explain how the structure of blood vessels relates to their function. So we're going to start off today by looking at what we mean by a double circulatory system, and then that'll give us some context when talking about blood vessels. So first thing I'd like you to do is have a look at the diagram on the right hand side of the screen of the human circulatory system. Bear in mind it's incredibly simplified, but it should allow us to think about what we need to talk about today. So what is the role of the circulatory system is the first thing to think about. And then why do you think the human circulatory system is referred to as a double circulation system? So think about your responses, pause the video, and then unpause when you're ready to continue. Okay, so the human circulatory system, I hope you've had a little look at that diagram. You could recognize the fact that it's made up of the heart, which is in the center. And then attached to the heart, you've got tube-like structures, which are called blood vessels. And through those blood vessels and through the heart, you've got blood running through them. So the main role of the circulatory system is to transport substances around the body. And the second role is to make sure substances are exchanged at different points. Okay, so they are your two roles. So the transport and exchange of substances. So why do we think it is called a double circulation system? Well, if you have a look at the heart on that diagram, you can see that the heart is actually divided into two. The septum of the heart, that is a thick muscular wall in the center, actually creates two separate pumps. Okay, so you've got two transport systems. One of those transport systems, as you can see if you look at the arrows, carries blood from your heart to the lungs and back again, and the other system carries blood from the heart to all of the other organs of your body and then back to the heart again. So you've got two pumps. So that's what we mean by the double circulation system. We've got two separate transport networks, if you like. So this double circulation system is really advantageous to us. And that is because it allows us to get lots and lots of oxygen and glucose around our body as quickly as possible. Okay, so you think about oxygen diffusing into the blood from the lungs. You've then got the heart pumping that oxygen around the body. The oxygen is then delivered to all of your body tissues wherever it's needed, and then the other pump then is responsible for pumping it back round to the heart and then back to the lungs to pick up more oxygen. So why do we need oxygen and glucose? That should be ringing bells. We need oxygen and glucose for aerobic respiration, and that's the process or the chemical reaction that allows us to produce energy. And without energy, obviously, we wouldn't be around for very long. So the double circulation system means that we can really efficiently transport important substances like oxygen and glucose around our body. Okay, so with that in mind, we're then going to look at, in lots more detail at blood vessels. So these tube-like structures that allow blood to move around our body. So the first one we're going to look at, the first blood vessel we're going to look at are arteries. Now, arteries carry blood away from the heart. So, and that's quite easy to remember because artery and away both begin with the letter A. So just remember arteries away, and that's a nice, easy way of remembering it. Arteries usually carry oxygenated blood. The only exception is the pulmonary artery. Okay, the pulmonary artery carries blood away from the heart towards the lungs. So with a bit of deduction there, you can quickly figure out that that's going to be deoxygenated blood, because the only reason why blood would travel to the lungs is to pick up oxygen, because it hasn't got much of it within it. So arteries carry blood at a high pressure. That is because the heart pumps oxygenated blood at a much higher pressure so that all the oxygen and glucose can get to all of the tissues in your body. If you think about where your heart is in your body, in the middle of your chest, oxygenated blood will have to reach all of your extremities, from the tips of your fingers to the tips of your toes. And if blood isn't pumped at high pressure, that simply won't happen. So blood travels through your arteries in big surges at high pressure. Okay, so every time the heart beats, there is a big surge of blood. And you can feel that as your pulse. I'm presuming you've all felt the pulse at your wrist. Every time you feel that bump, okay, that is a big surge of blood pumping through your arteries in your wrist. So arteries are built to withstand this really, really high pressure. So they've got a very thick outside wall. So obviously the artery doesn't break and leak blood. You've got a real wide area of thick muscle and elastic fibers. So if you think then, with every surge of blood that travels through your arteries, these elastic fibers will stretch and then recoil. Okay, so the artery actually flexes. It is built so it can move. If it didn't have those elastic fibers in, and it wasn't able to stretch and then recoil after each surge of blood, the artery will quickly become damaged, and that will cause you a lot of problems. Because they've got a large area of muscle and elastic fibers, it means the hole in the center of an artery is actually relatively small. We call that hole in the center of a blood vessel the lumen. Okay, so if you imagine a hose pipe, if you cut a hose pipe off and you look down the hole in the center, that hole is the equivalent to a lumen. Okay, so arteries then carry blood at high pressure, usually carry oxygenated blood, have thick walls and lots of muscle and elastic fibers to withstand high pressure. Capillaries. So capillaries connect arteries with veins. Okay, we'll worry about veins in a second, but capillaries are your sites of exchange. So every time substances need to travel either from the blood to tissues or from tissues back into the blood, that is done through capillaries. So if you imagine oxygen diffuses from the alveoli, or the air sacs in your lungs, through the walls of the capillaries into your blood, and then the blood will transport that oxygen round to other tissues such as muscle cells, where the oxygen will then diffuse out of the blood into the muscle tissues via another network of capillaries. Okay, so exchange of substances can only happen where there are capillaries. The reason why capillaries are good at exchange is because they have very narrow, thin walls that are only 1 cell thick. Okay, capillaries are incredibly tiny compared to arteries and veins. And the reason why this is really useful, that they have really thin, narrow walls that are only 1 cell thick, is because it means there is a very short diffusion distance. Okay, so this allows diffusion to happen. If you're unsure about what diffusion is, there are other videos on that, but just as a quick recap, diffusion is when substances move from a high concentration to a low concentration. So if we think about carbon dioxide moving out of the blood into the lungs, there's a high concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood compared to the lungs. So there's a concentration gradient there. So there'll be a natural movement of carbon dioxide out of the capillary into the lungs. Okay, and having that thin wall allows that to happen really efficiently, because there's only a very tiny distance between the two sites of exchange. Okay, so capillaries have incredibly small lumen as well. So I said they're very small. Their walls are only 1 cell thick, but the gap, or the hole in the center, this tiny lumen, is incredibly small too. It only actually allows 1 blood cell through at a time. So that means the pressure of blood moving through capillaries, is actually relatively high, because it's coming from the much wider lumen of an artery compared to a capillary into a much smaller space. So there's sort of a backup, so it's going to increase the pressure. So whenever you see capillaries, you need to think exchange. And the reason why they're good at exchange is because they've got very narrow, thin walls, only 1 cell thick, which provides a very short diffusion distance. It's also worth mentioning as well that capillaries form extensive networks wherever exchange needs to happen. So there's usually lots and lots of capillaries all together. So the more capillaries there are, you've got a very large surface area then for diffusion to happen really quickly. So around the outside of every alveoli in the lungs, you've got lots and lots of capillaries all surrounding the alveoli, so that exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide can happen really, really efficiently. Finally then, veins. Veins carry blood from organs towards the heart. So arteries carry blood away, veins carry blood towards the heart, So in comparison to arteries usually carry oxygenated blood, veins carry deoxygenated blood. Okay, again, there's an exception to this rule, the pulmonary vein. Again, pulmonary meaning lungs, vein carrying blood towards the heart. So if blood is traveling from the lungs towards the heart, then it would have picked up oxygen. So that's your only exception. Veins have the largest lumen out of all three, and that is because they've got a much thinner area of muscular and elastic walls. Okay, and the reason why a vein doesn't need a big area of muscle and elastic walls is because blood is carried back towards the heart under much lower pressure. Okay, one of the key features as well as of veins is the fact that veins have valves. Now, if you imagine the vein that would run from the bottom of your foot all the way up your leg back to your heart, it's going to be quite difficult with every heartbeat for all that blood to get from the bottom of your foot or the bottom of your leg all the way back up to your heart, because gravity is going to try and pull down the blood all of the time. So in veins, you've got valves. So every time the heart beats, blood is pushed upwards slightly, and this causes the blood to push through the veins. And then when the heart stops beating, or between beats, gravity pulls that blood back down, which shuts the valves. And that prevents the backflow of blood. It stops blood returning to where it's come from. So with each heartbeat, your blood will get slightly higher up your body, because the valves are preventing the blood returning to the ground again, or returning to where it come from. So they open at every heartbeat and then shut when between each heartbeat. So valves are incredibly important in allowing veins to do their job in returning blood towards the heart. I hope that makes a bit of sense. So key features of veins then. So they've got thinner muscular and elastic walls as blood travels at much lower pressure. They've got a very large lumen, and they often contain valves to prevent the backflow of blood. That is your stock answer in an exam. If it asks you the role of a valve, it is to prevent the backflow of blood. Okay, let's have a go at completing this summary table then. So each row asks you about a different feature of veins, arteries and capillaries. I want you to see how many of those blank boxes you can fill in. Some of them are only one word responses, others are a shorter descriptions, but pause the video, try and complete as much of that table as possible, and then when you're ready to go through the answers, unpause the video and we'll continue. Okay, so type of blood then that travels through arteries, veins and capillaries. Arteries usually carry oxygenated blood, veins carry deoxygenated blood, and capillaries, if you think about it, this one was a little bit tricky, it actually carries both, because when blood enters a capillary, it will have a lot of oxygen, but then exchange will happen. So by the time it leaves the capillary, it won't have any oxygen. So oxygen concentration goes down as the blood passes through the capillary because it's being exchanged out. The direction of blood flow then, so arteries carry blood away from the heart. Remember, A, away. Veins carry blood towards the heart. And if you think about it, capillaries in the middle somewhere, so they receive blood from the heart and carry it then towards the body. So they're in between, aren't they, arteries and veins. The pressure in Arteries, veins and capillaries then. So the pressure in an artery is high, the pressure in a vein is low, and the pressure in a capillary is relatively high because it's coming from a wider lumen of an artery to a much narrower lumen of the capillary. The size of the lumen, arteries have relatively small lumens, veins have relatively large lumens, and the capillaries have very, very small lumens that only allow one blood cell through. The wall thickness then, arteries have very thick muscular elastic walls, veins have small muscular elastic walls, and capillaries walls are only 1 cell thick, which is a key feature of capillaries. Valves then, the only blood vessel that you should have identified as having valves are veins to prevent the backflow of blood. So next job then, again, pause the video on this slide, see how many labels you can complete, and then unpause when you're ready to continue. Okay, so if we start at the bottom 2 labels, you've got an artery on the left-hand side, a vein on the right. Okay, if you want to add some more labels about the type of blood that travels through them, then an artery would be oxygenated, a vein would be deoxygenated. That's what the different coloured arrows represent. Then if we move anti-clockwise around the diagram, you've clearly got a valve within that vein. That's a big clue that identifies it as a vein as well. And then anti-clockwise again to the top, so we've got a capillary, very small. You can see that there's a network of capillaries there, which are a site of exchange. Then moving down through the centre, we've got the outer walls, the muscle and elastic fibres just underneath the outer wall, and then you've got the inner wall, and then this gap in the middle is the lumen. So hopefully that made a bit of sense. Right, some questions then. So again, you can pause on this slide, have a go at some responses, and then unpause when you're ready to continue. So 3 types of blood vessel then, arteries, veins and capillaries. I'm hoping that wasn't too tricky for you, that first one. What type of blood vessel carries blood away from the heart? Remember A, away, so that's arteries. Why do arteries have a thick layer of elastic fibres and muscle tissue? So arteries have a thick layer of these tissues to withstand blood passing through at a high pressure. Okay, so the key thing about arteries is, remember, all their adaptations, all their features help them to withstand blood pumping at a high pressure. Okay, so they contain a lot of muscle elastic fibres to allow the artery to stretch with each surge of blood. So what's the pressure like? Again, I've just spoke about it. It is at a very high pressure. And if you link that into the heart, so I've not really spoken about how the heart actually functions as such in this video, but there's another video on that if you want to find out more about that. But if you know about the heart, you'll know that the heart, or the left side of the heart, is responsible for pumping blood at a much higher pressure because the blood is oxygenated, and it's to ensure that oxygenated blood reaches all parts of the body. Okay then, a little bit of an exam style question here. So again, have a read through, pause the video, attempt some responses, and then unpause when you're ready to continue. Okay, so you've got a diagram at the top. So before you even attempt the questions, we should be sort of having a look at the diagram and seeing what we recognise. So the first thing that jumps out to me is the fact that we've got magnifications next to each blood vessel.